Okay, fantastic. Senator, thank you again for taking a few moments to chat with us. So let's start with your prediction markets bill. Give us the 30,000-foot level of what this bill is, what it seeks to do.
Yeah, the bottom line is it deals with sports betting. And I think it's really important that people understand we're not banning sports betting. We're banning the prediction markets, sports betting and on events. So one of the reasons this is really important in Utah is Utah's always been able to control the gambling environment in our state. And if this currently this layer of regulation is a federal layer of regulation and would attempt to supersede the state. And for a lot of reasons, it's wrong, but that's a core reason that it's a problem.
You've got a Democratic co-sponsor amongst your colleagues in the Senate and Congress writ large. Do you feel like there's strong bipartisan support as we sit here today?
I actually think you're going to see a string of bills on the prediction markets. It's a conversation that kind of has just exploded. I think it's coming into awareness. The $1 billion bet on the Super Bowl is the type of thing that brings this to people's attention. So I think you're going to see a lot more legislation, and we have some ourselves, but I think you'll see it from more than just the Curtis office.
Do you feel like there will be some pushback, opposition? I think with every piece of legislation there is, but you've got a federal agency out there saying things like, don't test us, or we'll fight you in court. We'll see you in court. What type of pushback are you expecting?
So listen, from the federal agency, I have no worries, right? They're going to push back because they love a broader reign, if that makes sense. I think, though, I mean, if you think about $1 billion bet on the Super Bowl, there's a lot of people out there who do this for fun. They're going to push back, but there's also a lot of people who deal with gambling addictions. There's a lot of problems with this. And just to give you a hypothetical, imagine betting on a high school athlete getting injured the day of a high school game. Like, imagine what could go wrong with that, right? Imagine betting on an athlete getting in an accident on the way to a game. And you can see now you've got a lot of problems with manipulation. Insider trading is rampant with this. And the problem is this federal agency just really is not geared up to deal with this. It was established to help farmers deal with crop failure or with weather, or it was established for some of these other reasons that most people in their mind would think of insurance, not gambling. And the reality of it is this is straight up upfront gambling.
Um, for your particular bill, you're focusing on the sports component of this. But as you well know, you can go on a lot of these prediction markets right now and you can place a prediction, I'll call it a prediction, on a lot of other things. What words people are going to say on an earnings call, when the United States is going to bomb another country. Why does your piece of legislation stop at just the sports component of
Yeah,
this?
only because it's a start, right? This is a big issue. It's going to take a lot of discussion. We're not trying to solve the whole problem, but I do agree with you that there's some really serious problems. Imagine a politician betting on the outcome of a race, a political race, right? So yes, those things have to be addressed. I would just simply say this is a starting place.
Okay. Yeah, I can't do it all at once, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
Um, Back here at home, I've talked with some of our local elected leaders in the legislature, and they're saying things like, it looks like a bet, it smells like a bet, it's a bet. Obviously, in the Utah Constitution,
Yeah.
gambling is illegal here. What would you say to Utahns that are looking at this? Let's start with the parents, maybe parents, Utah parents here that might have children using these platforms right now. There's a lot of societal concern about rooting for the United States to bomb another country where people could die. Those have societal impacts. What are we
Oh,
telling Utahns back here at home as you're trying to push this legislation through?
yeah, for sure. And the addiction issue, especially for our kids, this ties in really nicely with a lot of the work the state is doing with social media and kids and addiction to other social media apps. But now layer in gambling on the addiction part of this, and you can see why parents should be very concerned. So my message to them is, look, rally around and support this. This is a big deal. and you may enjoy your fun you have just kind of betting on a 50-cent bet over here, but there's ramifications with that. And in Utah, our elected leaders have chosen no gambling, right? Now we can have that debate, right? But that debate should be with Utah legislators, not with a federal agency.
And so, as we sit here today, if this bill passes as is, would it give the states the power to enact these laws on a state by state level? Is that what your legislation would
Oh, now
ultimately
remember,
accomplish? Hand this back to the states?
yeah, mine is primarily the sports and events category. So they would be unable, the state would prevail in those categories. But as you had alluded to before, it's much bigger than that, and we do really need to deal with all of it.
Anything else on the prediction markets that you think is really important for people to know about with respect to your legislation?
I might just mention I grew up in a home where my father was an insurance salesperson. And I think about that a lot with this because if you go back to the intention of the agency that regulates this, it really functioned like an insurance policy. And you buy insurance for things you can't afford to pay for. If you're a farmer, you can't afford to be wiped out by a storm or a drought or something like that. And the stretch that this is to say that same agency is now allowing this myriad of these, they're called contracts, but like you said before, if it smells like a bet, if it smells like gambling, it's really gambling. Is something, and then of course you get the one size fits all from a federal agency instead of letting Utah craft their own solution. We're gonna be a little tougher than obviously Las Vegas on this, and so it's really important, and I hope the people of Utah will be supportive. I believe they will.
All right, real quickly, switching gears, Senator Iran. Obviously, Utahns have seen gas go up about $1 in just the last month or so. This is impacting people back here at home. Your stance on Iran as we sit here today?
Yeah, what's interesting, I grew up I hate to admit it, in the 60s and 70s, and I saw people just a few years older than I am drafted in the Vietnam War. And after that war, Congress wanted to rein in the president. The presidents, three of them actually sent young people off to war without a declaration of war. So we passed what was called the War Resolution Act in 1973, thinking that we were reining in the president. And since then, literally every president has used that as justification to go to war without Congress. And that's where we are. So we can have a real healthy debate about should that change. And I have no doubt some level that should change. But the Constitution was a little vague. It gave Congress the responsibility of declaring war. The president is the commander in chief. And so we've struggled to define where that line exactly is. And I think that's what we have here in Iran. Now, let me be very clear. That expires. There's a 60-day time limit and another 30 days for the president to withdraw. And I've been very clear. If there's no declaration of war after that, I am not supporting this because that's now on Congress to say, okay, President, you come and make your case to us for a declaration of war. And if you're right, we'll give it to you. And if not, we'll end this. And I think that it's important that people understand that dynamic. And I actually believe, at some point, this isn't the time. We need to have that conversation about should that 1973 act be revisited? I think it probably should.
Two final points on Iran. Do you support U.S. troops on the ground in Iran? And then secondly, what would you say to Utahns that are seeing those gas prices go up
Yeah,
so
well, to the
steeply?
first question, I can't think of enough ways to say no. Like every language I can think of, no, 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 no. This is a line. I mean, people are already uncomfortable, and that's a line too far. And to Utahns who are paying that gas price, I do think, look, this is a big deal. This adds up to a lot of money, but I do think it's important to step back and realize what's going on here. You had a country who, in essence, had been at war with us for 4 decades. You have a country who, on their trajectory they were headed, we would not have been able to stop. It would have been like North Korea the second they got those nuclear weapons, or we've now seen that they have long-range missiles over 2,000 miles, right? And once that happens, you don't have the ability to do what President Trump did. And then it's game over. And then they control us. And so I do think the American people have a right to question what's going on, but I also think it's very important that they step back and say, look, there's something had to be done. And if it wasn't done within a certain time frame, we lost our ability to do it.
And then lastly, Senator, with respect to a proposed ICE detention facility here in Salt Lake, it did catch a lot of people off guard. We're hearing,
Sure.
the highest ranking members of our Utah legislature say they had no idea. Our Utah delegation, Governor Spencer Cox, were you aware that the federal government had purchased this facility before we
I,
started to hear it
yeah.
circulate in the news?
I heard from Mayor Mendenhall reached out to me, and I had to admit to her, look, I got to go get some details. And as a former mayor, I was grumpy and made a statement because you cannot have something of that nature move into your city without a say by the city. Now, I get it. The federal law allows them to preempt the city, but that doesn't mean they should. There should have been hearings. There should have been discussions with the community. Zoning should have been looked at. Impact on things like traffic should have been looked. All of those things are why cities have planning commissions. That's why cities have hearings. That's why they have open meetings, right? So the public can get involved. And I was very disappointed. To me, it felt like a middle of the night backroom deal that they were afraid to let the sunshine in on. And I think that was a mistake.
And now we're starting to see some of that play out. The city council just yesterday, they said that they're going to impose different water restriction rights on some of these types of properties. So we are starting to see that play out now. Going back several administrations, we know under the Biden administration, there were discussions about bringing a detention facility here. So this is not just something that this current administration had been talking about. But Governor Spencer Cox said one of his concerns is that this isn't just a ton of money spent on something that is temporary. What happens if we fix this issue and this facility isn't needed anymore? Do you have any concerns over the long-term viability of a potential facility here?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons you have those meetings, those hearings, that public dialogue, so that we can answer the questions. Unfortunately, we've just had a change of secretary, as you know, to Mark Wayne Mullen. So we're all kind of caught a little bit. I have had a conversation to talk with the secretary, Mark Wayne Mullen, about this, let him know my concerns about the way that it came in. But obviously, he's not had a chance to have his feet underneath him to answer my questions about the long-term viability that you're alluding to.
So he wasn't really able to give you anything in terms of this is
Yeah.
absolutely going forward.
So when I talked to him, it was right when this happened, which has now been, I think, about a week and a half, and he had just barely been nominated, almost, by a few hours. So I think it's fair to say, right, we need to give him a few days, but we'll continue to work with him. And I know, you mentioned the governor, and the governor has said that we need a facility. And the reality of it is, to some degrees, this moves to a executive federal level to an executive state level, if that makes sense, and if the governor's supportive, that in many ways shapes the discussion more than how I feel.
And again, this goes back, to a previous administration. These discussions had started in a previous administration.
Yeah.
But do you support an ICE facility here in Salt Lake? Do you feel like one is needed?
I don't have the information to answer that question. I think we're all happy with what's happened by choking off the border, the people coming into our country. I think there's broad agreement that the worst of those who are here committing serious crimes need to be dealt with. Certainly, you need facilities for that, but nobody's really had the opportunity to explain to me the scope, right, and everything else, which I would like to know.
Yeah, and as you said, maybe some of those conversations could have been had been prior.
Yeah, for sure.
Senator, thank you again so much for your time. Really do
course.
appreciate it. As always, we know you're very busy, so much appreciated. Thank you again.
Take care.
All right, you too. Be well.